Welcome to the One Within All to the Universe podcast. I'm your host, Chance, and today we have a very special episode indeed, as we're joined by two of my favorite mental giants of mystical knowledge, Marty Leeds, author of numerous works on the gematria and astrotheology of the Bible, and the preacher-in-chief at his Gnostic Academy of Lord Jesus Christ. And we've also got Stephen Young, aka Headflux, author of A Fool's Wisdom and an alchemical investigator par excellence. These esteemed gentlemen are with us today to honor and explore the work of Robert Fludd, a truly great genius and champion of God's goodness, whose 4-century-old writings have stood as inspiring and pertinent entries into the canon of alchemical and hermetic learning and are more accessible to the initiate than most of the other works in their category. Fludd's diverse interests as a Christian alchemist and doctor of physics span a breadth that no single conversation could ever hope to contain, but a brief rundown of his work includes helpful instruction in the creation of memory palaces to store and readily access one's knowledge, experiments in action at a distance, and a thorough defense of the virtues of the weapon salve, a long-distance healing modality of the ancient world, the musical harmony and foundational structure of the cosmos, the order of creation and patterning of macrocosm and microcosm, the mystical anatomy of man, astrology, esoteric mathematics, biblical esotericism, and any other branches of natural philosophy that get to the essence and metaphysics of reality at large. In the style of our good brother Marty Leeds, I'd like to begin this episode with a prayer of sorts. In truth, it is a quotation taken from Fludd's writings to his patron, King James, but taken in the spirit of a prayer, it serves very well. Dear God, it plainly appeareth that all men are but unity in essential virtue and act, the which is so united to the first actor in nature, that it is altogether in truth inseparable and indivisible from it. Although men and all things else divide and branch themselves into different persons and shapes in respect of their macrocosmical materials, for number, distinction, difference, and multitude are the defective progression of blindfold and deceitful matter, but in the subtle spirit and form is stability, permanency, and unity, from whence only the sweet consonance of peace and the world's harmony is extracted. Return, return, I say, unto thyself. Subject thy body unto thy reasonable soul by diving inward into thy treasure, and then prostrate and submit thy mental and spiritual part unto thy God. For so shalt thou be made one spirit with him, conditionally that thou doest persevere in humility and acknowledge from thy heart that grace of thy Creator, by which thou shalt be glorified and exalted. Wherefore I cordially admonish thee to ascend from this world unto God, that is, to penetrate quite through thyself. For to climb up into God is to enter into thyself, and not only inwardly to visit thy dearest soul, but also to pierce into the very center thereof, to view and behold there thy Creator, which thou mayest the better gather and recollect the beams of thy inward man from the distractions of this outward world, and revoke them from external actions, to participate with thy inward joys. Thus I say, wilt thou know that each man is thy brother, and that thy brother is part of thyself, and all men are but one and the selfsame thing in specie, which is in effect the very unity and essence of God himself, masked from the sight of unworthy men with the material mantle of nature. May we seek this essence in all we perceive and express its healing power in all that we do. Amen. All right. I thought that works as a prayer. What's up, guys? Let's do this thing. Welcome, Marty. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us, Chance.
You know, I hear that, and you know what I hear, Steve? We're terrible writers. You hear that? It's like no one writes like that anymore. It's so beautiful, like poetic, expressive, just right to the heart. Like, yeah, we need more of that. So anyway, great.
What I love is he's just going, he's talking to the king, and he's just going straight to the deepest secret of all mysteries, that it's yourself that you're going into, that it's all is self. He's saying God is the all, and that you find it in the deepest part of yourself. All is self. I'm like, wow, he pulled that off. Like if you did that the wrong way, you're burned.
Yeah, right. Well, he was almost right. I mean, attacked for sure. I'm sure we'll get into it, right? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I found Robert Fludd when I first started getting into alchemy. Of course, I was finding all these old drawings, all this ancient artwork. In the beginning, I was just looking at the artwork and trying to decode it, and I wasn't really giving much thought to who actually made the artwork. And then I started looking at, well, who's behind a lot of this stuff, and then his name came up, and so I started looking into him and his life, and I wrote about this in my book that. What was remarkable to me was that the structure of his life seemed to be like the structure of my life, and that he went to university and studied, and then afterwards he went off touring around Europe, and he was playing music. He was obviously big into music and big into alchemy as well, and then came back and began his sort of great work. And I sort of related to that because I went off touring as a musician after I left university as well, and then came back home to Scotland and started, digging into alchemy a lot more deeply. And of course, the other thing was that he was, a man of God, an alchemist and a scientist, but also a brilliant artist, a brilliant writer. He seemed to be all these things together, which, in the modern age, we don't see people like that. You're usually one or the other. You're an artist or a scientist or a man of God, or, we're all put in our own pigeonholes. And I just saw him as being like the only person I'd ever found that just embodied all of that. And so immediately I was very inspired and just, wanted to learn more. And I started digging into him and just finding lots of interesting stuff. And, I've barely even scratched the surface, even though I've known about him for about 5 years.
And as a scientist too, one interesting thing is that the guy who came up with the theory of how blood circulates possibly actually got that from Fludd's metaphysics, this guy Harvey. So in some ways, even though he was right at the sort of edge of where quantitative measurement type science, which is called enlightened, began to take over from the qualitative essential sciences or the natural philosophies, kind of exemplified in his beef with Johannes Kepler, which I think is kind of amazing. They had sort of like a rap battle of the time, gentlemanly dissing each other in their respective books. But, his work was able to even possibly lead to innovations in discoveries about biology. So he's a giant that continues to be felt. His ripples are still very, very strong, even 400 years later.
Yeah, Stephen has known about him longer than I had. Like I had read pieces here, like in a Rosicrucian manual. I'd seen his artwork here, and it was only until I think last year where I actually did the deep dive. And then like Stephen was saying, it's like, you have this affinity to this guy immediately because you're just like, oh God, this guy was just hungry, right? And he was just had his interest in all these different things. It was medicine and technology and artistry and music and, all of that sort of stuff. But his like trajectory too was, I think, a lot of the same as Stephen was saying. It was like he did that sort of hero's journey thing where he sort of like cast out and then had to come back in, and in his coming back in, well, he was gaining legitimacy kind of thing. Like, he allegedly he was graduated medical school, and then Oxford or whatever it was, didn't want him in, because his ideas were obviously too advanced at the time to the normies at the time. They couldn't essentially even understand him. So like even his trajectory in his life is like, I just have a connection to it. Like, cause I think part of this is that sort of like Buddhist kind of, Buddha thing. Like you get thrown out and then you got to come back to the, you know what I mean? Kind of thing. And that seems what happened to him, so it's cool.
Yeah. And one of his major works was on the history of the macrocosm. He talked about the microcosm and the macrocosm. So, that's a good distinction to make because coming from my physics background, I always thought of the macrocosm as like, general relativity, right? The universe at large, and the microcosm as being quantum physics. But when you look back at Fludd, you realize, well, actually, no, the macrocosm is the universe at large, if you like, the torus field, and the microcosm is man. As I say, the man is a universe in miniature, and the universe is structured as a great man. And that, this is what Fludd believed, and that was kind of central to a lot of his work.
And that's really alchemy is and Gnosticism in one sense, because it's know thyself. It's like you study man, you study the universe, and all of the greats, I think, had that clearly in common. There's just no question, that they were actually trying to understand themselves in their predicament, and then once they did, it's like sort of like this flood, if you will, of gnosis is really what it was. And that's what he was. This is why I think we never really heard of Fludd, why we heard of Kepler. We never heard of Fludd. Because Fludd was the guy who was like, hey, the Earth is flat and blah, 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 and he's actually polymath, actual genius, so he gets shelved, and what we get presented is Kepler. So.
Right. They hold Kepler up as the sort of paragon of, quote, science, because his whole thing was based in measurement and quantitative measurement, sense-based, comprehension of the material world. Whereas a lot of Kepler's measurements were actually just ganked from Tycho Brahe, and they weren't really even his to begin with. So it's kind of the perfect example of how, being that you could consider the lower aspect of the reality or the devilish aspect of reality to be the material, sensible, quantitative aspect of matter, that they say about evil that it can't really create, it just like scavenges from other people. And so that's Kepler. He was kind of like this scavenger, where his main beef with Fludd in the first place was that Fludd's macrocosm and the diagrams that he created for that, it's like, well, they don't really adhere to the actual pattern in the sky or the shape that these orbits appear to make in the sky, totally missing the point that he was describing an internal aspect of these things, like a symmetry, a spiritual symmetry, and like elemental descent to things that it holds up very, very well. And yeah, I just find that really interesting. So, like Fludd's the creative one, and Kepler in that beef is the sort of scavenging one.
Yeah. I mean, he was big on music, of course. And the idea of harmony, which, harmony is ultimately a quantitative relationship between like different levels or different scales. And music is where quantity becomes quality, because the frequencies and ratios are felt as feelings. And I think, Marty, you'll know this as well. I think music is probably one of the best trainings of the mind for this reason, because you understand harmony and proportion and correspondence, and you have a sense for like dissonance and distortion and all this kind of thing. Yeah, it's just so I think like his first thing he wrote was on astrology and music and the relationship between them, and a lot of stuff just flows out from that.
Yeah, it seems like it's like almost like a perfect, like Kepler's exoteric and Fludd is esoteric, And it's like, because even Kepler argued, he's like, well, we can have the motions of the heavens and stuff, and basically was like, so okay, so it does this. What does it mean? And that's when Fludd came in and actually gave meaning to these things and how it's connected to you and stuff like that. But because that gets into something that I would say would be, in order to truly understand, you would have to elevate your consciousness. Obviously, it seems like Kepler wasn't there. Like Kepler's being like, I've got all the notes to the music. Okay, well, we can play the music. Like, we know what it sounds like. We know what it feels like. And that's and I think, honestly, Fludd showed that he was a balance of those two. Like, he had both. It wasn't just one or the other, and that's why he was so like brilliant creatively,
Since we're on the subject of the Fludd Kepler beef, I think we should just go into that further. And I think it's really fascinating in the context of the pretty recent show I did over the Rene Guénon book, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, where he makes this argument that the Kali Yuga, or the Iron Age, is basically created and defined by people's obsession with quantity, that the fall has to do with losing sight of the quality of things. Like, even the number is qualitative, that 3 has a quality to it, but it's an abstract in nature. There's no such thing as 3 as a quantity in nature, other than a sort of mental division that we create abstractly. And so on this like form versus matter or essence versus sense subject, Fludd has a lot to say, but I really like this quote where he says, "For it is for the vulgar mathematicians to concern themselves with quantitative shadow. The alchemists and hermetic philosophers, however, comprehend the true core of the natural bodies. By the select mathematicians who have been schooled in formal mathematics, nature is measured and revealed in the nude." Formal in this sense is not like, highfalutin, but formal like the form of things, as in the realm of forms, the essence of things. So the select mathematicians who have been schooled in formal mathematics, nature is measured and revealed in the nude. For the spurious and blundering ones, however, she remains invisible and hidden. The latter, that is, measure the shadows instead of the substance and nourish themselves on unstable opinions, whereas the former, rejecting the shadow, grasp the substance and are gladdened by the sight of truth. But here lies hidden the whole difficulty, because Kepler excogitates the exterior movements of the created thing, the actually existing natural object, whereas I contemplate the internal and essential impulses that issue from nature herself. He has hold of the tail, I grasp the head. I perceive the first cause, he is its effects. And even though his outermost movements may be, as he says, real, nevertheless, he is stuck too fast in the filth and clay of the impossibility of his doctrine, and perplexed is too firmly bound by hidden fetters to be able to easily free himself from those snares without damage to his honor, and ransom himself from captivity cheaply. And he who digs a pit for others will unwittingly fall into it himself. Just like, damn, nobody burns like these gentlemen.
I know. That's like, what does he say is, nevertheless, he is stuck too fast in the filth and clay of the impossibility of his doctrine. Like, oh, so well written there, right? But it's so interesting on the next page, because I got the book in front of me here. They even say Kepler naturally objected, furthermore, to Fludd's assumption that the Earth and not the sun is the center of the planetary sphere. So they were literally having the heliocentric, geocentric argument in the middle of this whole thing, And he goes on to say that formal mathematics on the next page, he just goes on to reiterate. It's like, no, you're just looking at, it's like, that's not giving us any insight into what's actually going on. Why should we give a shit if Mars is doing this? What is Mars? That crosses the line into actual understanding as opposed to just pointing out things,
I got to also thank Steve here, because our last conversation about elements really made it click for me, this whole quantity quality divide. And ever since I started putting that filter on how I look at things, oh my gosh, all kinds of epiphanies have been emerging, and the quality of my life has improved. Who would have thought? Who would have thunk that focusing on quality instead of quantity actually improves the quality of your life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to go back to something you said earlier there about, you were talking about form and substance. And so I was looking, because he had this idea of like three divisions of the cosmos, where I think it's the Empyrean, the ethereal, and the elemental. And so the elemental would be where it's predominantly matter or substance. And the Empyrean would be predominantly form, like all form or no matter, all form and no matter at the highest level, but then kind of mostly matter, unformed at the lowest level. And then in between the ethereal level is where there's this perfect balance of form and matter.
And a good understanding too, to help people with that, because we hear form and we think of like a thing, So when you hear form in this sense, you could also say pattern. And that's how Fludd describes it. It's an abundance of pattern, God, the potter, the pattern.
Well, that's basically saying it's an abundance of God, right? Like when you actually just crack it. Right? And this is one of the things that I had always really struck me. And Fludd said it too. And I've seen it numerous times in like mystical literature and things like that. This notion that God is everywhere and that you should be able to see the logos, right? Actually experience it like in everything, right? And it says this, and I really love this, and I'm not sure what page this is on, but it says, the scriptures teach us that no age has existed, exists, or will exist in which single individuals experienced in the world and its darknesses have not been able to retain knowledge, gnosis, of the holy light, counting themselves amongst the Son of God, which is basically him saying that no matter what like happens down here, like the ebbs and flows of time, like the pathway to God and understanding will always be there. They can never, it doesn't matter. Like you could be in the pits of hell, but there would still be this pathway out, and it's always available. This, thus in each century and epoch were some, however small in number, like now, who passed through the narrow portal, while the larger part of mankind trod the broader and more conspicuous way. For we read that in each epoch of the church, some were found who were given the victory of the tree of life, which is in the midst of the paradise of God. And that's actually a notion straight from Revelation, that it's like, gifted, which is the gnosis. That's the reception, and so he's basically saying that this entire tradition, which he actually promotes like Rosicrucianism and stuff like that, is basically saying that's what these traditions are. They're like there to tell you that, hey, this is always here. It's always available. It's in your language. It's on your hands. It's in the sky, that kind of thing. And that to me was just that's so powerful. That's one of the things that just always knocked me on my ass when it came to mystical stuff, so.
Truth is reality. And it's always in front of your eyes. It's always perceivable in all moments, at all times. The truth is always right there, ready for you. It's our filters that block us from noticing.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was very much into the Rosicrucians, but as I understand, I was just reading today that try though he might, he never got accepted. He really wanted to be a part of the Rosicrucians, but as I understand it, they never let him in.
He never met a single brother. There's some people that theorize that the whole idea of Rosicrucians originally was kind of like a hoax of sorts. And I wonder, because you'd think they would, if they were really brothers out there, they would have grabbed Robert Fludd right away. Now, I mean, now there's definitely people that are part of Rosicrucian orders, but I wonder about that.
Yeah, that's history you're never going to unearth, right? Unless we cross the gates of death and figure that out. But this was one of the reasons I had such an affinity to this guy, because as most people know, like I'm very pro Freemasonry, like I promote it, but I'm not a Mason. I don't go to lodge or anything like that. So he was kind of the same thing, like what Stephen's saying is like, as far as we know, he actually wasn't a Rosicrucian, yet he was willing to openly defend it because as far as we could tell, he absolutely knew what it was actually about. And it was this sort of passing on this true mystical knowledge of what the Bible is and all this other stuff, So, that was just one of those things that's like, God, I really feel for this guy, man. I know what that's about, so.
As far as I know, none of us are part of any societies or organizations except, the best church ever, the Gnostic Academy.
Yeah, no, I'm not part of anything, but I actually had someone write to me recently who said he was a 32nd degree Freemason, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I was like, I don't know anything about it. I've never been in a lodge myself. I just read some Manly P. Hall or things like that. But anyway, he said to me that he said that basically all he had to do was just attend these theater shows, basically. What do they call it, like ritual theater or something? There's a certain number of shows you have to watch, which there's ancient knowledge contained within them. But he said that there was no pressure at all to understand what you were being shown. And he said that so a lot of people work their way up in Freemasonry. All they have to do is watch the show. They don't actually have to prove that they understand a word of it. And he said the amount of people that actually understand what's being taught in the lodges is like minuscule, few and far between. Most are there for, to advance their careers or whatever, but not to actually like understand the mysteries. I don't know what you think about that, Marty.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, for the most part, that's what I've said. One of the reasons I haven't joined anything like that is because, as far as I can tell, at least from the outside perspective, and from people I know that are Masons that actually are into the mystical stuff, that it's extremely watered down. Like nobody, for the most part, is there actually trying to understand the mysteries, which is the whole point of Masonry, So when I started getting into, Masonry and the Rosicrucianism and stuff like that, it was like from the outside, is like, well, I actually just wanted to understand, like, what are you guys doing? Like, what does any of this stuff means? Isn't that the point? Like, it's a mystery. So like, try to solve it kind of thing, So, but yeah, it's, just like most things in our world are dilapidated and, that has the guts ripped out of it. It doesn't matter what you look at, medical, the churches, all that sort of stuff. So that's just kind of where we are. So it's unfortunate, but
Let's talk about the history of the macrocosm. Arguably the most interesting part of Fludd's work. Also a little bit difficult to wrap your head around without some serious study, as anything worthwhile is. The ramifications of his work on the macrocosm and its metaphysical structure are pretty vast and, fascinatingly enough, derived out of a lot of alchemical type experiments that he did to try and demonstrate why he came to the conclusions about this pattern of the cosmos that he did. And although he's inspired by a lot of ancient philosophers, it seems that Fludd actually created his cosmology on his own to a large degree in terms of the order of it and the greater pattern of it as a musical harmony of sorts. I find that really interesting. And so there's a lot to talk about there. And I'll kick it to Steve in a moment, because I know he's been brushing up on this, but I think a good place to begin is Fludd's descriptions of God, because obviously as a Christian, this macrocosm is being created by something, and that something is God. And what I like about Fludd's descriptions of God is that he describes it as the all in all. There's a reason why I start every episode of the show with welcome to the one in all. So here's a few quotes from Fludd. He says, "Infinite nature, which is boundless spirit, unutterable, not intelligible, outside of all imagination, beyond all essence, unnameable, known only to the heart, most wise, most merciful, Father, Word, Holy Spirit, the highest and only good, incomprehensible in height, the unity of all creatures, which is stronger than all power, greater than all distinction, more worthy than all praise, indivisible Trinity, most splendid and indescribable light, in short, the divine mind, free and separate from mortal matter, glory of all, necessity, extremity, and renewal. Here I say God, the highest and greatest of all, whose name was made blessed in eternity, skillfully formed the admirable machine of the entire macrocosm, and beautifully adorned his structure." So I could keep going. Actually, there's quite a lot more he's got to say about the indivisibility of God, but we'll just stop there for now. It's really, I love the way he writes.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, I was looking at the sun. He would do a lot of these drawings of the sun, and I was noticed how in those days the sun and the moon were always drawn with faces. And in his drawings of the sun, I can try and dig one out, but he says the Holy Trinity is in the sun itself. So the sun, basically the face of the sun is the Father, the light of the sun is the Son, the S-O-N Son, and the heat of the sun is the Holy Spirit. And so he sees that whole divine Trinity as being sort of embodied in the sun, which is the source of life.
He also, as we know, he was a Kabbalist. And so he actually is bringing his understanding of the Tetragrammaton into his understanding of the cosmos. And he's actually reprimanding Kepler because he's not. So we know the quaternary of the Tetragrammaton. Well, one of the things I've covered is basically showing how that creates a triangle that actually maps the sun, right? So this would be the Father has the Son within literally the name, which is all Kabbalistic, it'd be like the encodings. But he says here the dignity of the quaternary number will be discussed, and I shall defend it with might and main as far as my weak intellect allows, spurred on by the insolence of the author Kepler. So, when you talk about the quaternary, that's not only the Tetragrammaton, which would be the holy name of the Father, which is heralded all across alchemy, etc. But you also have the notion of the Tetractys, right? That it's literally just the unfolding of the number line, just as it naturally does for everybody, and how that absolutely points specifically and directly to divinity, even encodes the Trinity. It even says here, the number 4 there, not only has the sacred theology extolled the paramount superiority of this number above all others, for which reason I feel myself moved to regard and acknowledge it as divine, but also nature herself, the maid of the Godhead, and the nobler mathematical sciences, that is to say, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, have demonstrated its wonderful effects. Hence why we examine thoroughly its praise in theology. We shall perceive, first of all, that this quadratic number is likened to God the Father, in whom the mystery of the whole sacred Trinity is embraced. So he's literally like, the 4 leads to the 3, and this leads to the Father, and there's no way you're going to possibly understand Earth itself unless they actually, put this into play. And he's basically scolding Kepler because Kepler's abandoning it, which, according to like the alchemy, would be abandoning God. So,
yeah. And there's more to say about that, which we'll probably have to circle back around to. But what I think is interesting about the Kepler beef is the way that it's actually still going on. Fludd and Kepler, one of their main arguments was as to whether the soul arises from nature or is that beyond nature or prior to nature. And Kepler was saying it arises out of nature. And this is literally the exact same question today. The hard problem of consciousness. Does the brain generate consciousness, or does consciousness exist before the brain? So they were, they were typifying this argument way, way, way long ago. But I want to give people a little review about the Tetractys, just to simplify it a bit for those who aren't familiar with the term. 1, 2, 3, 4. You add together the components there. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. And 6 plus 4 is 10. So when you unpack 1, 2, 3, 4 and add that stuff together, you get 10. So within the 4 is the whole number line contained. And they would symbolize this with a triangle with 1 at the top. And then the next line would be 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7. And is that right? Is that how they designed it? Yeah, there's 4 rows to it. It's hard to verbalize this and describe it visually. But yeah, the Tetractys, the 4 contains everything. And then about the sun, the other thing that he said about the sun that was fascinating was how he says, wise men have correctly compared the deity to the sun because all spiritual and invisible brightness comes from God, and all things are inwardly illuminated by the same. Just as all visible external light and brightness come from the sun, for the sun is the emperor of material things, God, holding a fiery scepter, is the emperor of spiritual things. So what he's saying is the way that the sun creates light and we can see things in the world because of the light of the sun, when you close your eyes and you have the image-making faculty of consciousness arise and that inner light. I don't know if this ever happens to you guys, but sometimes I'm laying in bed with my eyes closed and I get so much light that it's as if somebody is flashing a flashlight in front of my closed eyelids, but I'm in a dark room. And I'm always like, hi, God, okay, what's up? And that inward light, that is how God is akin to an internal sun.
Yeah. And I think another part of that beef with Kepler was they disagreed over the world soul. Fludd was saying that the world soul is in the sun, but Kepler was saying that the world soul is in the earth. But the earth is the darkest element, right? The earth is like as far from fire as you can get. There's no fire in earth and there's no earth in fire. They're like complete opposites. And yeah, it's interesting how, that also ties in with like heliocentrism and geocentrism, right? It's like, is the world soul in the sun or is it in the earth? Kepler obviously thought it was in the earth. Although he was proposing a heliocentric, a sun-centric model. So I believe the world soul, the world spirit, was inside the earth, not inside the sun.
Well, one thing that I picked up, and maybe I'm interpreting this incorrectly, so help me out here, but in Fludd's Macrocosm, he's got things in 3 essential layers or 3 heavens, which you alluded to, Steve. You've got the monad, which is like unity or God the maker. You have the dyad or duality of matter, and the triad, which is the fiery shining essence by which matter is rendered from potential and chaos to actuality and formed. But in this structure, there's also the 3 heavens that you described, the top one being the Empyrean, the second one being the ethereal, and the third one being the elemental. But in this structure, he puts the sun in the second heaven. And the moon is actually in like this third lowest heaven. And when you look at the whole structure like mapped out, there's kind of like sub parts in each as well. And so the septenary comes into play here. And if I understood correctly, the sun is actually situated in the position of like 4 of this septenary cosmos, or the center. So between the very highest height of heaven and the lowest part of heaven, or even the physical material earth, you could say is that lowest heaven. The sun is actually in the center. So in a way, there's a heliocentric aspect to Fludd's cosmology, but not in the sense that the sun is the center that we revolve around, but that the sun actually exists in the middle as a mediator point between the highest heaven and the lowest. And I thought that was fascinating. It's kind of the real heliocentrism in a sense.
Yeah, it says, it is apparent then that the incorruptible spirit is in all things, right? So that, God in all things, but most abundantly in the little world called man. And for as in the great world, God is said rightly by Jerome in his translations to have put his tabernacle in the sun, from whence a perpetual, never-dying motion he sendeth forth life and multiplication to every member and creature of the great world, and by the agility of his spirit he moveth and giveth life unto the whole spirit of the world. The spirit in the sun animateth and giveth motion, life, and spirit in the aerial spirit of the whole world. And so he's basically saying that, we have this, and he even says, he goes on to say, so also in the very like manner, the same incorruptible spirit filleth the little world, it is the temple of the Holy Ghost, and hath put his tabernacle in the heart of man, which is moveth.
And this is in the microcosm, it's the heart chakra.
Yeah, exactly.
The fourth chakra, the central chakra. It's like all those images of Jesus with the flaming heart. That's it. That's the sun that is the heart. It's the central sun internal to you, and then the sun being the center of the stack of the cosmos vertically.
Yeah, so he created this model of the cosmos called the Monochord, which is like a single chord or string like you would have on a guitar. And it's like got God's hand at the top on the tuning knob, tightening it. And so there's actually 14 divisions across the 3 worlds. So you have the world of elements, so it's got 4 divisions. And then the world of the soul, which has 7 divisions, the 7 planets. And then the Empyrean, which has got then three divisions. So you've got 4 plus 3, 4 plus 3 plus 7, 10 plus 4. So that's 14. So it's 2 octaves. So he modeled the universe as being a 2 octave system, split across these 3 levels, with 4 and 7 and 3 in each.
And just to mention there, obviously you have the reference of 314, right? So there's a reference to pi there, and even his creation. And of course he uses, if you just look at his illustrations, you see so many uses of the geometry of pi, like even cutting the human being in half and the monad and all of this stuff. But then also the Tetractys, which is the naturally unfolding of 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, using your like basic sort of methodologies of Cabala, that's just an anagram for 3, 1, 4, 2. So that's pi. That's a reference to pi as well. So, and at least what we teach, that would be considered like the mathematical word, right, of God, if you will. And he talks about the word a lot, actually. In fact, he even mentions that Plato had knowledge of the word. The Greekish Egyptian philosophers, Plato, Pythagoras, Socrates, Hermes, they did all their instruction basically from the idea of the word, which is Jesus Christ, and of course, Fludd makes no, pulls no punches. He was a huge mystical Christian. In fact, we talked about before, and I could probably read this moving forward, that he actually healed people as a physician with the name of Christ, which is like, wait, what? So pretty amazing. So.
Yeah. He was, he wanted to reconcile and unify the Hermetic teachings with the biblical teachings. They were basically his 2 favorite books. And I was the same. I didn't start reading the Bible until later in life. I probably was reading Hermeticism before I started reading the Bible, but I love them both. And so it was just like I was so very much drawn to him. But I mean, just as a point, another thing I found was quite interesting between us was I found out he had an alias. His alias was D Fluctibus. And when I looked up the translation of that, it means of the flux, of the flux. And so I'd been called Head Flux for 20 years now. I've been using the alias Head Flux. And, it was just so strange to me to think of someone 400 years ago having a music alias of Flux, right? It's, very strange. But it was another just comparison between us that I thought was really interesting. And then after that, I put our names into your gematria calculator and found they had the same value of 48 in the calculator. So then I was just like, my mind was blown. I don't know what the hell it means, but it's just like the more I learn about the guy, I find just these really interesting connections.
But isn't that kind of what the mystical mindset gets you into? I've just this last week, the syncs were just off the chart. I couldn't even begin to tell you the 1,000 syncs that happened to me, that sort of thing. And that's the Kepler mindset isn't going to get you to understand that, and also when those things happen, they're so unique to you. It's like a dream, it's catered specifically to you. You could tell people about, hey man, this thing, but no one's really going to understand because it's literally directed towards your heart. And that to me, those are the little signs and symbols that happen along this little path that actually tell you what you're on the right path. So once again, like you're saying, the Fluctibus, that's just like a cosmic giggle, dude. You know what I mean? Just hilarious.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, I came up with the name Head Flux. I was just thinking I'd had numerous DJ names before that because I've been DJing about 10 years before I came up with that. But I like this word flux because I associate it with flow, and I was trying to make this music. It was good flowy music, right? And so, but what I've learned since then is in alchemy, in metallurgy in particular, flux has a specific meaning. Flux is actually a substance that extracts impurities. When you're working with metals, so it completely changed the meaning of the term head flux now. So it's extracting impurities from the head, right? A head flux, which is just crazy.
It's kind of like a good example of, in philology, one of the letter swaps in terms of a sequence of them would be the letter C and K are essentially the same. Sometimes the letter X will have the sound of a C or a K, and the C or the K can interchange with S or SH. So a flux is a flush, X and SH becoming very interchangeable type of letter sounds. So a head flush, I want to talk about that a little bit because one of my favorite things about Fludd was how I was gifted from reading him a better articulation and understanding of not just the mental nature of the cosmos itself, but also a reason for why mind-body healing is really so effective. Of course, I'm very interested in that as a biofield tuner. So going back to the analogy of the sun, Fludd says regarding God, he says, the mind is in no ways divided from the essence of God. The mind is in no ways divided from the essence of God. Rather, it is bound up with him, as is the light with the body of the sun. For we see that the solar rays are bound up with the body of the sun and cannot by any means really be divided from it, because the essence of light is a unity and cannot be divided into parts. But naturally, with respect to us who abide in multiplicity, we say that the soul of one man differs from that of another in number and kind, although in truth all souls have a continuous relation to the one world soul, or the Metatron, as has the sunlight to the sun. Consequently, multiplicity really lies in matter only and not in form, which is nothing but a continuous emanation from God, or the Word of God, imparting life and being to all creatures. When it is withdrawn, life is destroyed. I therefore conclude that as God's essence is indivisible, so also nature itself, which is his emanation into the world, is in every respect one single form and indivisible in itself. So there's a couple of things here, but he's saying that light being kind of an instantaneous thing from our perception, and the whole idea of it having a speed limit is extremely debatable and questionable as an idea. The light that comes from the sun is a continuous stream that connects directly to the sun. There's no actual separation between the light that's hitting us here and its source up there. And in the same way, the light of the mind is a continuous stream from God, which is the eternal sun. And so this is exactly what I've intuited from doing biofield tuning at a distance with people. I would say to people, your life force energy is, that your biofield energy is the same as your consciousness or your mind and your memory. And that energy, that life force energy is one, it's indivisible. So there's no separation between the life force energy that animates this body vessel here in me and you over there. It's not like a portion of it is in me and a portion of it is in you. It's one continuum that is in its totality contained within everything that it touches or is a part of. So even the language is difficult because we're trying to talk about it, as it applies or expresses itself in the realm of multiplicity and matter, but it's really an issue of form and essence. And that essence is singular. It's a total singularity. So that mind of God or your mind are the same thing. So like, watch what you think about, watch what you look at, you're giving everything that you look at and think about, you're giving to God to look at. That's why I like to say people are peepholes for God, to see his creation. But yeah, that idea of the internal sun being God in the mind and that continuousness of those ideas. Oh my gosh, he says it so well. And it's a huge paradigm changer for people, I think, when they really grasp that is the truth.
Yeah, the light that he's talking about, he specifically refers to Jesus Christ. So as you were bringing this up, and he says, now his doctrine was concerning the true philosophy, whose foundation was Jesus Christ, or the true wisdom and cornerstone, which sustains all and is all in all and fills all and acts or operates all in all, which is contrary to the tenor of the ethnic doctrine, basically saying that this is separate to this and this is that sort of thing. It's like, no, when you get to the core of it, as you were saying, it's like, yes, we could talk about it as like, I have a portion, but that portion is connected. And this is the reason that in Christianity that you say you have to express love to even your enemy, because if you hate your enemy, I'm not saying to let them roll and destroy and things like that, but if you hate them, then what you're doing is actually hating that light. And you can't do that and then expect to ascend or whatever you want to say, So,
and the other thing about this too, is it really gives a framework to comprehend psychic powers or ESP. Again, biofield tuning for me, I'm waving a tuning fork around in my living room on a call with somebody in another country even. And I'm like, okay, you had a leg injury between the knee and the hip of your left leg at the age of 16. Tell me about that. And they're like, yeah, I did. I had a sports injury. It took me out for a year or whatever. That's not the way to understand that. Is not that I have some kind of special powers, but actually before I do every session, I invoke the source and singularity of all life, or the creator and sustainer of existence, AKA God, and become just more of a conduit for that great spirit. And I ask for that. And so as I'm trying to explain here, I'm not special for being able to do that. It's literally your birthright as a created child of God to have these so-called psychical powers they're really it's really God's truth and God's mind filling up your mind with the light or information that you're asking it for in the pursuing of the healing and the fecundity effect the healing brings, or the growth, the life and vivifying effects the healing brings. Well, that's what God's light does. Just like the light of the sun causes things to grow, or it heals, helios, the light of the mind can do the same thing. So you're doing God's work when you do it, when you use it in that way. So there's nothing like demonic or witchcraftery or evil about psychic stuff. It's actually It's why the Hindus will call it siddhis. These are spiritual powers. They're gifts from God. They're not really powers in the sense of like to use it in some way to gain advantage over others. But when you use it in service with virtue, it's like God will give it to you every time you need it.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about the sort of indivisible or continuous nature of light and matter, actually, because this goes into the atomism stuff, right? Which is all kicked off around that time with Kepler as well. In fact, I think Kepler talked about igneous atoms. Is that right? Like one of his terms, the idea of like atoms of fire, which is probably the early idea that gave rise to photons, and how then the way science then broke matter and energy down into these photons and atoms actually makes all that stuff impossible to explain, right? You're like psychic phenomena or long distance healing and things like that, like are just like when you start thinking in terms of pieces of light and pieces of matter, it's very hard to explain. But when you look at it as one continuous thing, which is a continuous thing which is able to penetrate all other things, like with the ether, right? Ether is able to penetrate all matter, all things, and like mind as well, the mind of God, also able to, penetrate all things.
And there's another aspect to this when it comes to number. Because I got to say this too, because it really follows up on what you're saying perfectly. Why the materialist science and the particleist science doesn't work. Another way to understand that, being that it's all based in measurement and number, has to do with the continuous nature of number itself. So when we number something 1, 2, 3, 4, or we measure it 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, etc., that's discrete numbering, meaning there's like 1 and then there's 2 and then there's 3. But you just go check out the paradoxes of the philosopher Zeno, and you'll quickly discover that, oh yeah, that doesn't really make sense, because between 1 and 2, there's an infinite spectrum of possible divisions, because the number line is indefinite. The number line goes on indefinitely, meaning you can divide it in half and divide it in half and divide it in half forever. And you could go forever between just 1 and 2. So what that means is number itself is not a discrete thing in nature. It's only abstractly so for the convenience of our communication. And as Fludd says about number, God contains every name, since all is in him and he himself is in everything. Not unlike the manner in which all straight lines drawn from the center to the circumference are said to be in the center. Or just as number is said to exist in unity, which is the common measure, source, and origin of all numbers, and contains every number joined to itself in a unique way. So what he's saying about that is number itself is a unity. That there's what number actually is a ray from the center, that there's no actual division between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That it's a continuous flow or continuous expression. And when you try to conceptualize of reality and number itself as anything other than a continuum that is indefinitely connected, there's going to be confusion and misconception reigning tyrannically over you. So hopefully that makes sense. But what he's saying is that there are not discrete particles in nature. Everything is a continuum, just like the rays of light are a continuum connecting the source of it to whatever it's touching.
Yeah, numbers themselves too actually just kind of show that, and this is something I had pointed out just thinking philosophically about numbers over the years. It's like, 2 is actually, you would think that's a duality. Well, it's actually unity, because when you talk about 2, you make it into a unit that brings the 2 together into 1. It doesn't matter what number 153, but you just talked about 153 allegedly different things, but you brought them together in unity. And that every time they do that, you have to go back to that 1. I was saying this the other day. I was like, dogs understand math. They understand math. And be like, that's crazy. No,
unity.
Unity. Exactly. Right. Try to give a dog a treat and then don't give it to the other one. They at least understand 1. and that's all you really need to understand, because ultimately even the number line itself reaches back to this unity and something beyond unity that we can't even possibly understand. And that gets into the whole, inexplicability of God and just, unnameable, unknowable kind of thing. Cause it just gets to a point where it's like, well, I think the best we can come up with is it all comes together, a very Trinitarian, notion. So.
Yeah, I think the word they use in mathematics is uncountable sets, right? You have countable sets, which would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have an uncountable set, which is all the numbers between 1 and 2, which is just completely uncountable because, as you say, you can just keep on dividing and adding more decimal points to your heart's content.
And then you also get the question too, is like, even philosophically, like if you take an orange and you split it in half, he's like, oh, you got well, no, there's 1/2 of that orange. So that half is still a 1. You know what I mean? They just split that. And it's like, oh, I got those 2 quarter. Well, no, each quarter is still one little piece though. You know what I mean? Like there's still this notion of every time you mention, it's like 1, 1, 1, 1, it's just.
Yeah. Everything is divisible by 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we should probably move our way towards some concluding thoughts, although there's so much more we could say about Fludd. I love this. This has been so much fun. Who wants to go first? Concluding thoughts, additional thoughts to things I just said?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I mean, talking about, thinking of the stone, then the Philosopher's Stone as being a salt, it connects with the soul. And like you were saying, it's like the Philosopher's Stone is like your most evolved soul, or your most purified self. I think there's a connection there. Yeah, I mean, there's lots to ponder with the Philosopher's Stone. There is actually a website where they have a list. I think it's on the Adam McLean Alchemy website. He has a page with all the different names the Philosopher's Stone, or many different names. There's something like 200 different terms that have been used, because they call it all kinds of different things, but one of the first ones at the top is blood of Christ. It's one of the names of the Philosopher's Stone, blood of Christ. So I know maybe Marty will have something to say on that.
No, I mean, it just immediately you said that, I was thinking about like your 12 self salts. Immediately it's just like, boom, now you're back into the zodiac, and then the form of the salts and the blood. That was the thing that got me, man. Like actually one of the main things that got me into even starting a church and stuff like that, because I had been studying, alchemy and this sort of stuff, and it kept leading back to Christ. And I was like, why? Like, I don't get this, right? Like, cause I understood Christianity, incorrectly, if you will, or whatever, by essentially modernity. And so it was just consistent, and then to the point when I remember I read Carl Jung specifically said that when they were referring to the Philosopher's Stone, it wasn't a replacement. It was just another name for the completion of the Christos, if you will, or that great work through Christ. And so that was, to me, it was just like, wait a second, this is what this is all leading to. This is what these guys are talking to. That just made my head spin, because I had never been ever in my entire life ever seen anything like that attached to Christianity, and yet it was so illuminating. And then we look at today about how the work that, that we're engaged in, how it's received, because you say the things that people don't want to, Cabala, gematria, numerology. It's this, it's like we're living like a carbon copy of what happened back then. It seems like, you know what I mean? Like we're going through the whole thing again, And so, anyway, yeah, that's it. I won't ramble on, but yeah.
Yeah. And, with people who say alchemy is like witchcraft and devil worship and all that. I mean, I was reading stuff and they're referring to Jesus as the master. I love this. They call Jesus the master, as in the master alchemist, because of, well, the transformations that Jesus achieved, in the story. I mean, even just the transformation of death into life with the resurrection, that's the ultimate, it's the ultimate transformation, really. So, that puts Jesus is the master alchemist and the biggest inspiration for all true alchemists, I would say.
And I think, once again, this is God having that sort of cosmic giggle. It's just hilarious that most people that are Christians, if you brought up like actually what that whole thing is, I say the Bible is probably the greatest alchemical book ever written. And yet, if you said that to most Christians, they'd be like, I don't get alchemy, and it's just like, I guess maybe this is how it works, just so guys like you and I can have a laugh. Yeah.
So as I reflect on everything we've talked about here, it really seems to me the greatest, most diabolical devilry is the dogma of churches and religions that give you a Christ that is with all of the prepackaged answers of what it means and how to be saved. That if you just believe this right thing, this right way, then you're all good and there's nothing else to do. I think that is directly antithetical to the very teachings of Christ, where he says, knock and I'll answer the door, as in you need to interrogate this stuff. You need to ask questions. You need to humbly put yourself in the I don't know state, which is the potentiation, the possibilities, and ask for wisdom to be given to you, not to be given to you by a preacher or a relative or whatever that says this is the answer and this is the only thing it can mean. That's the fear, because they're afraid that unless they believe the right thing, then they're damned. And that's, see what I mean? Like, it has to be like this. That's a fear mentality. So ultimately, like, the beauty of this alchemy, and Fludd brings this up himself, is that if you ask for wisdom and you ask for understanding and you look within about these things and you just keep refreshing yourself with the mysteries of God and creation and the harmony of the heavenly spheres and all of that it entails, you will be shown things. You will find things out. Things will come your way and they will happen. They'll be put in your path synchronistically, magically, through dreams even. There's many different ways it can happen, and it's going to be unique to the individual. But the most important thing that I took out of all of this is keep asking the question. The quest is the quest with your eye on, keep that going.
Yeah, if I can, I'll just conclude here and basically saying that is probably the key message I've gotten out of engaging in mysticism or alchemy or reading guys like Fludd. It's engage in the mystery. Like, you're presented a mystery in this life. There's a billion questions that are surrounding you all the time. Seek them out. Visit the interior of the earth and find out what's there, and in the search, ultimately, this is the other thing that's so amazing about this is that these guys were there to tell you, historical figures that were absolutely connected to God and like true polymaths, that there is a destination. There is something to obtain. This isn't, and if you do work and things like that, God is going to listen. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of dedication and focus and intention and learning. I mean, this is why the 7 classic liberal arts are always such a key thing. Cause as Steve was saying, you are not going to understand this stuff unless you had a grasp on music, dissonance and harmony and scale and octave, all of that sort of stuff. And so, I think that's what I've learned. Just jump into it and, get, feet running kind of thing, man, engage in the mystery. So, yeah,
seek and you shall find. Again, for me, like coming with alchemy and, with music and all that as well. And even with the flat earth stuff, like it's all that for me was like a scientific path to Christ. I think maybe that's why people don't like it. It's like, I didn't go to church. That's not how I was introduced to Christ. I was like looking for scientific understanding. And the deeper I went, the closer I got to Christ, until I realized that everything's just pointing to that anyway. I said I started reading Hermetic stuff before I started reading the Bible. I realized I wasn't going to understand the Hermetic stuff until I looked at the Bible as well. And flat earth as well, people come at it just trying to understand how the world works. And then before they know it, they're like, God, I agree with the Bible now. What happened? It's like a path from science to spirituality, I suppose.
That's if I may, that's what I think why your path and your book and what you're saying and how you speak it is resonating with so many people, because you're so open and just being like, and it's like so weird because I'm the same thing. Like I kind of came at it at like a numbers view, geometry, philosophy. There was no dogma. I wasn't going to church. And you kind of did the same sort of thing in a different realm, physics, college and things like that, playing music, but it all ended up in the same place. And that to me is a message that really needs to get out to people, because it's like, you just keep going, you keep you keep searching and keep your nose to the grindstone. That's when the magic happens and you'll end up at the top of the mountain. That's my take. So
the secret is the top of the mountain is in you. You're already there. Kurt, God already loves you. You're good. That's the secret. You're already good. So just be good. Guys, give them your, starting with Marty, then Steve, give them, where they can find you, your plugs, things you're proud of. I mean, you got so many banger Sunday sermons. I wouldn't even know where to tell them to start, but definitely follow Gnostic Academy on YouTube.
Well, I'm taking a sabbatical right now, so I won't be back till April 6th.
Lazy Irishman.
I know, right?
Sorry, when will you be back?
I think April 6th is what we're doing, but we are going to do Sunday sermons continuing. Just I'm going to play some old videos or something like that. But yeah, GnosticAcademy.org. That's it. All the portals there, all the things we do, podcasts, and I just had a conversation with Steve late last year, which was amazing. And I'm sure we'll do that again. And it's just a great group of people, and we do lots of learning, lots of loving. So
best church ever.
That's what they say. So
yeah, it's great. I love Marty's content, and I still haven't, there's so much of it I still haven't seen as well, and I'm really looking forward to going back over all the work you've done. It's been absolutely incredible. So for me, my website is stephenyoung.uk. And I also have music alias Headflux, as we talked about. So headflux.com, all my music is on there. But for my my other work, it's stephenyoung.uk.
Awesome, guys. Well, I guess we got to wrap this up sometime, but a true highlight of life to talk about the stuff with you guys, and look forward to my next conversations with each of you. Maybe we can mix it up as a trio again sometime. There's definitely some synergy here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, man. It's always cool hanging with you guys. I'm just happy that there's people I can even talk to about this stuff. So,
amen.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that's how we do it. That's what you're here for. Conversations like this you don't get anywhere else except Interverse. Never before in the history of the world have you heard Robert Fludd discussed by the three of us guys. Yeah, really fun. I looked forward to it for weeks after we planned it, and this conversation definitely did not disappoint. You know the drill. If you were here for hour 1 and you didn't catch the second part, what are you waiting for? $8 a month? That's basically nothing in today's economy. Do it. Let's do it. It's less than the cost of a meal. And you get the whole month of extended content. More than that, really, because you could go binge on the archives. After hour 1, we just warmed up from there. Things just got better from there. So if you are curious about the second half of this talk, get on my Patreon, or you can do it through the YouTube channel membership for this one. Nothing too spicy that it needs to be kept off YouTube. We discussed a lot. So my summary does not really encapsulate the gravy, but Marty gave us a good perspective on the Kabbalism of Robert Fludd. Then we discussed esotericism in his writing and his kind of sneaky take that you could consider subversive to the time about the devil or evil. Does the devil exist? What's the deal? Then a huge amount of the conversation was dedicated to really comprehending this idea of the esoteric Christ as the light of the mind, just like the light of the sun is part of the sun. So if you want to find the Christ light within, this conversation might help you get there. I don't know. That's a big claim, but I felt it. And then we discussed Robert Fludd's take, his defense of the existence of an actual physical, real life philosopher's stone. Or does he? Is that really what he means? These authors you got to take beyond face value, you know? And hopefully we were able to do that for you. I know this talk was a bit introductory to Robert Fludd, something as vast as that guy. And it was my first time really reading him in depth. So this is a thinker that I immediately gained a lot of resonance to, the way that he describes the world and the dynamics of the one mind and the energy body. All of that fits with the way that I've experienced energy. I particularly appreciate somebody like Fludd, who is so adamantly sure and wisely arguing for the oneness of God, the Father, the Fa-ether, the all in all. The fact that he even makes this assertion in the way that he does is kind of a lot different from the religious thinkers of his time and even since his time. You know, I really enjoy, there's an entire section of the book that's kind of dedicated to Fludd's beef with Johannes Kepler, which is very gentlemanly, but also profound. And some of the burns are kind of funny. And one of the things that was in there that we didn't talk about in this show was Fludd versus Kepler on the question as to whether the human soul is a part of nature. I think this is kind of a paradox of a question, because maybe it's yes and no at the same time. The soul's beyond the distinction. But when you really boil it down, these two were arguing about the very same thing that materialists argue with idealists, philosophical idealists today, as to whether consciousness emerges from something that the brain is doing. Is consciousness a function emergent from biology? Or is consciousness primary, outside or beyond biology, and biology is just receiving it? Receiving it would be the word. So in that argument, he gives like a long form and a short form of his answer. Fludd does. It's like, A, the human soul is an image of God. He was like Kepler was making that assertion. So Fludd felt like he could just immediately jump on that. And then B, God can neither be divided nor composed. C, therefore, neither can the human soul. Well, if the human soul is an indivisible unity, inseparable, and cannot be built out of anything or taken apart in any fashion, then how can it be something that comes out of biology or out of nature? If we're assuming the soul means consciousness, which I think it does, definitely. So I love that, because why I think biofield tuning is so powerful is because it gives people, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but it gives people the experiential knowing that the life force energy that is the light of their mind is an inseparable singularity that is not just linked, but indistinguishably whole with all other life force energy in the cosmos. Even saying it that way is a little bit wrong, because it's like there isn't all other life force energy for your life force energy to be whole with, in a sense. It's just the one. There's only one life is what it means. There's one life, and that one life is the spirit that animates all life. So the plurality is a quantitative illusion of matter, and the qualitative essential truth is that there's only the one life. So if that's the case, and that life is also mind, that the mind is what gives the life in a way, then of course it makes sense that a guy like yours truly, or any other biofield tuner or energy healer that operates remotely, can wave tuning forks around in their living room and help the person receiving affect change in their mind that leads their body to healing. It's great. So I'm not going to be too much more wordy with this outro, but there's lots of ways to support the show. Typic New Herbs, great way to do it. Interverse coupon code. Also digging Lotus Way a lot lately. There's a link to that in the description of every show. Definitely do yourself a favor. Pick up a book from both of these guys. Got A Fool's Wisdom by Stephen Young. Great read. Very all-encompassing. I know we've talked about it before. If you haven't read that yet, don't have it on your shelf. Why wait? Support this guy. He's got a family. He's doing this thing for the love of the game. He deserves some support. And then, of course, the great Marty Leeds. I mean, if you don't have books by Marty Leeds, I'm really not sure what you are doing with your life. If you like esoteric mysteries and numerical riddles and Jesus Christ and the salvation of Gnosis, why don't you have his books yet? Here's a good one. Check this out. Lord Jesus Christ. Look how thick this bad boy is. And it's just full of esoteric metaphysical juju. It's great. Love it. I think I've got all of his books, actually. At least some, maybe some of them digitally, but yeah, that guy also deserves your support. Check out both of their YouTube channels as well, especially the Sunday live stream sermons with Marty. Sorry. Marty's his rap name. Anyway, there's so much good going on in life right now. I hope you guys are feeling it. The vernal equinox is fast approaching, and looking forward to the many great shows to come in 2025, Year of the Snake. Everybody's getting it. I love you all. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.